Okay, go ahead, Christina. We're recording now.
All right. Well, welcome to our, where are we? July 2022 Virginia Plastic Pollution Prevention Network meeting. We have in the last several months switched to every other month. So we, of course, are making our meeting super special now. The Virginia Plastic Pollution Prevention Network was started in August of 2020. So we are now 2 years old, and it was started by myself with Ecomaniac Company. My name is Christina, Katie with Clean Virginia Waterways, and also the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. We get some support from them. It was started to help increase collaboration, cooperation, communication throughout this Commonwealth of Virginia, and the groups and people that are working on the issue of plastic pollution within the state. We wanted to, it was actually a goal of the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, and we just wanted to make sure that everyone could share it, had a place to share information, communicate, and work together on this very important issue. With that being said, the only update that I have is that we have our monthly newsletter going out tomorrow. I do want to give a shout out to Emily, Katie's intern, who's been doing a great job of keeping up with our newsletters. If you have content, she needs that today. Any upcoming events, talks, announcements, anything you want to send to her, it needs to be in ready to print format, short paragraphs, images, if you have any. You can actually send those. Emily, can you put your email in the chat?
Yes.
For if you'd like to send directly to her, or you can send to virginiappn@gmail.com, and I'll make sure that gets to her. But that is going out tomorrow, because I believe there is a vacation coming up soon and nobody's working on newsletters after tomorrow. So once again, we do welcome your content for our newsletter. Anytime you have content, please go ahead and let us know. We'll make sure that gets out. We have over 250 contacts at this point in time, so it is worth sending that to us. Katie, you had a few announcements.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. I wanted to just give you all an update on the Virginia Marine Debris Summit, which we've mentioned during past meetings. The summit is going to be focused this year entirely on consumer debris. So bottles, caps, bags, cigarette butts. We're not going to be talking about derelict fishing gear, abandoned boats, or microplastics, because we want to focus on what is actually the largest type of debris that we're finding, our volunteers are finding. So the summit is going to be at the Virginia Aquarium in Virginia Beach. It's going to be September 27th and 28th, thanks to generous sponsorship from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program, and the Freedman Family Fund, or Foundation. The registration is going to be super, super inexpensive. We're wrapping up the budget this week, but it looks like registration for the 2-day conference with meals is going to be under $45 per person, early bird. And that includes a dolphin watching tour on the aquarium boat with scientists. And that will be a reception. So it's going to be very, very feasible, I hope, for all of you to be there. And again, that's September 27th and 28th. Registration will open this week, and you'll all get a notice so that you can register. We are limited to 110 attendees, so make sure you register early, please. The second thing I wanted to share with you all is we will, over the next 2 or 3 months, be migrating to a new website platform. You'll continue to get notifications from the Virginia Plastic Pollution Prevention Network via constant contact emails. So make sure you look in your spam filter if those go there, but that's the way we want to communicate with you. So at any rate, look for more information soon on our new website. And the last thing I wanted to share with you is, as many of you know, Clean Virginia Waterways was working for the last 2 years on the issue of abandoned boats. These are fiberglass boats, which are plastic and glass, that are often disposed of incorrectly in the environment. And last month, we released a report that shows the 2 years of effort that we had on that with lots of stakeholders, Navy, Coast Guard, Army Corps of Engineers, local governments. So please go to the Clean Virginia Waterways website to learn more about that. And we have a 4-page summary if you don't want to read the 44-page report about abandoned boats in Virginia. So those are the updates from Clean Virginia Waterways. And I'm really, really excited about today's presentation. Just a reminder, we are recording it and we are asking you to put your name and organization in the chat box just for our attendance records. And now back to Christina to introduce our speaker.
All right, thank you, Katie. So yeah, we've got a great speaker for you today. I've heard nothing but good things, and I'm really excited to hear what's going on. Ellie Moss is with Perpetual, and she works with companies, investors, nonprofits, communities, and other stakeholders to identify, evaluate, and implement solutions to address plastic waste and pollution. Ellie is the lead author of Sea of Opportunity, The Dirty Truth About Disposable Foodware, and Reducing Plastic Pollution Campaigns at Work, and led the work to create the living landscape of reusable solutions. One of Ellie's current projects is Perpetual, a nonprofit working to drive implementation of reuse systems at scale, and that's what she's going to be talking to us about today. Thank you for joining us, Ellie. We appreciate you being here today. You're on mute.
We can't hear you yet, Ellie.
Oh, do we have to unmute her ourselves?
Oh, yes. Hold on, Ellie. I see you had, I think you rejoined. One moment, please. This is technical challenge day. All right, Ellie, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, this is a little bit of technical challenge day. I've joined on my phone, so even if my face is freezing, you should still hear my voice. And if that's not the case, then I'm not sure what else we can do. But my colleague Christina is with me on the line, and so if I disappear at any point, I'm sure she can pick up where I left off. Christina is going to be helping me by sharing the slides. But before we jump into the slides, I wanted to just say a couple things. First of all, thank you, Christina with a C from Ecomaniac, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you, Katie, for the invitation to come and speak. I'm really excited to share the findings and some of our projects with this group. And because you are a diverse group, it would be really helpful to me if, as I'm talking, you put comments or messages in the chat. I want to make sure that I'm connecting this work with stuff that's going to be relevant and useful to you. So really want this to be interactive, and happy to go into any questions or go into more detail or things like that, as it would be helpful. As Christina mentioned, I'm going to cover 3 topics on this call. I'm going to start with an overview of some work I did called Campaigns That Work. You can actually see the full report at campaigns.work.org. But I'm going to give you the short version today, 5 best practices for how to address, how to message about plastic waste. The second topic I'm going to speak to is the reuse landscape that Christina also mentioned. This is a database of reuse solutions across 9 different categories that I'll just give you an overview of, and that's a website. Also, it's reuselandscape.org, and I'll put the links to these in the chat. But that's a resource you may find helpful as you're thinking about solutions or different types of things to implement in your communities. And then lastly, I'll introduce Perpetual, which is a new nonprofit that's looking to work at the city level on immersive implementation of reusable foodware programs. So without further ado, let's jump in. So because I do have a dubious internet connection, Christina's going to share the slides, and I should be able to speak to them hopefully without interruption. But I can see the chat, and please do keep any comments coming. So when you're ready, Christina Gherkin, you can share the slides. So the one that we're going to start with is, as I mentioned, this project called Campaigns That Work. And this project was a project where we looked at over 65 different publications looking at the behavioral science behind behavior change on plastic waste specifically. And the impetus for it was, as with sustainability broadly, there was an observation that in reality, even when people have a lot of concern or intention around doing the right thing on plastic waste, using less plastic, not littering, it doesn't translate into reality a lot of the time. People say that they really want to be part of the solution, but something breaks down between that intention and how they actually behave in their lives. And so we were trying to get a better understanding of how to connect the two. So how do you message to people? How do you frame campaigns that really help people connect that intention to action? So we can look at the first one, which is on the next slide. The first best practice I wanted to highlight is the importance of making it relevant. Often we frame plastic waste problems or environmental problems generally around doing it for the earth or for future generations or for children or sort of for the greater good. And people, that message resonates with people. And if you ask people why they do something, often they'll give you that answer. But behavioral research tells us that it actually, as a message, doesn't shape behavior. It's more of an afterthought, actually, often. What does help messaging start to influence behavior is if you minimize the distance between the problem or the solution and when the person's life. And so there's 3 types of distance that we talk about. We think about geographic distance. So how can you make sure you're making this relevant to your community instead of making it relevant sort of at the global level or talking about the impact on some, people that live far away and feel very different from the people in our community. So making sure you're connecting both the impact of the problem and the value of the solution to the local community. I imagine this is something that feels obvious to many of you. I'm sure this is what you do already, but the research would say, if you're doing that, you're doing the right thing. There's also temporal distance. So sometimes we think about a problem being a problem in the future as opposed to being a problem now. We know from behavioral science that when it comes to things like saving for retirement, for example, or even putting off chores today, future you, future Ellie is not as important to me as present Ellie. And I'm not always going to do right by future Ellie. We know this. I'm not going to save enough. I'm not going to exercise. I'm not going to eat well. There's a lot of challenges between present Ellie and future Ellie and that behavior gap. So the more we can frame problems and solutions as being relevant now, as opposed to in the future, that helps it feel relevant and help people better align their behavior with what you're looking for. There's also mental distance, which is is this impacting people like me? Or is this impacting people that I don't think of as being like me? And so there's different ways to tackle that. You can have messaging that helps people see the connection between themselves and people who they may not have thought about as being like themselves, but who in fact are. I mean, we all have more in common than we do. That's different fundamentally. Or you can frame it around actual impacts, on people. So maybe I don't think this is a problem that's impacting me specifically, but helping make that connection can help connect behavior and intention. Another way to make it relevant is to actually think about customizing the messaging to specific audiences. This can be in the context of phases of life or life transitions. So you can see a couple examples here in the pictures, how to give people a challenge around going back to school and having these moments in life where we're changing our habits anyway. We're going to have to set up new routines, but that's a great moment to integrate behaviors that are aligned with plastic waste solutions. It can be having a child, it can be retiring. There's a lot of kind of moments and thinking about how to align those transitions with more plastic-friendly or plastic solution-friendly behaviors. Another thing that has emerged in the research is that certain segments of the population, and segments to some extent demographic, but also psychographic, the way people think about things as much as their sort of identity in terms of gender or race or class or anything like that, is helping frame it in terms of what that audience finds most relevant to them or sort of addresses their particular issues. Now, the example I've provided here is a demographic issue, but research has found that men find carrying empty reusable shopping bags into grocery stores emasculating. And maybe it sounds funny. I mean, it's something that never would have occurred to me. I am someone who very happily carries empty reusable shopping bags into grocery stores, but I also carry a purse into a grocery store. So getting into some of these behaviors where maybe there's something that's making people feel uncomfortable, maybe they don't even fully recognize that's what's happening, but it's enough to sort of get in the way of adopting a behavior that might be aligned with reducing plastic waste and litter. The bottom picture here of the person holding the disposable foodware and the metal foodware is actually a fun video where it has a man in the grocery store, and he's looking at these, like, sort of imagining the difference between these two options. And he goes ahead and he sort of goes into his mind and he imagines different scenarios where where the plastic keeps failing him and embarrassing him. So people are trying to eat cake and they keep breaking, or the plastic plates kind of dump everything on the floor because they're too flimsy. So it uses great humor, but it also addresses a specific anxiety, I think, that maybe men had or identified in the context of that study. So I'm going to move on, but I just wanted to say again, feel free to jump in with questions in the chat. I'm happy to, just make this as relevant as I can to you all, so it really is meeting your needs. Okay, so the next one, and there's 5 of these. Number 2 is all about normalizing the behavior. So one of the challenges that we have right now is that use of disposable plastic is very normal. And it's interesting, if you hear people of older generations, or sometimes people who maybe grew up in parts of the world that didn't adopt disposables, as they have adopted disposables more recently, people have had to learn to throw things away. That was not always the obvious behavior. And so we need to turn that back, right? We need to make the obvious thing to do, making a different choice than disposable plastic. And so how do we do that? We use good social norms to normalize good behavior. I'll come back to this when we talk about Perpetual, because this is one of the premises of the work that Perpetual wants to do around reusable foodware, is that we need to make reuse the norm as opposed to the exception at a city scale. But in this example, really thinking about how to normalize good norms and being careful not to inadvertently reinforce bad norms. So some of the examples on this page is really showing that this is what people do. So we all like to, whether we sort of explicitly think about it like this or not, social norms are a very powerful shaping influence on our behavior. We're more likely to do something if our neighbors do it, or if our peers do it, or if others in our community do it. So giving examples of what others are doing is a great way to signal to people that this is normal. This is how people behave. Changing the default options. So for example, making asking for disposables, making it so that you have to ask if you want a disposable, as opposed to the other way around, for example. So the default is not giving people a straw, and then people have to ask for a straw. That's another signal about what the social norm is around using straws. And then if you have survey results, this is a tricky one. So if you have survey results that show that most people agree with doing the right thing or believe in these solutions, then that's really helpful. What you need to be careful about is if you have survey results or you have a study that shows that most people are doing the wrong thing, you want to be really careful with that. Because if you let people know that most people do the wrong thing, even though your message is that people are doing the wrong thing, what people internalize from that is that that is the norm, that what most people are doing is that thing. So even if you're saying it's wrong, that doesn't always, people will still see, oh, well, again, this is largely at the subconscious level. They're not necessarily consciously having this thought, but it makes the bad behavior seem more okay. Littering, using disposable cups, things like that. And it's also important to recognize that people who are seen as leaders in a community can be a really helpful way to demonstrate norms, and especially to help shape new norms. So if you can have visible people in the community adopting the behavior that you want to be the norm, that's a really great way to give people an example of how that can work and help subtly influence how people think about stuff. So we can go on to number 3. The third one here, and I'm not seeing it quite yet, there we go, is making sure you tell people what to do, not only what not to do. This is another sort of norm thing, but also anyone who's a parent of a small child knows saying don't do X is less effective than saying do Y. So this, I think we're all small children to some degree in that sense, and what you tell people to do sets the right expectation in their mind about what, that sort of puts the right idea in mind. Another connection point here is often campaigns will focus on raising awareness of an issue, and that's important. But if you raise awareness of something, but then you don't give people something they can do about it, it's less likely to influence behavior. So people might, their awareness level will go up. If you ask them, do you care about this problem? They'll say yes, but the likelihood that they're going to change anything that they're doing in their lives because of it is lower for most people. There, of course, is, in many of these cases, there's a small segment of the population that will do the right thing regardless. But if we're really looking for, influencing large numbers of people, needing to really be specific and help people not only understand why it's a problem they should care about, but also so that what they're doing about it matters. So for example, on the left here, una bombilla no más, that means it's just one straw, nothing more. So people often minimize the impact of their actions as opposed to, and they don't see the bigger story around it. On the right hand here, you see the concentrated dish liquid. This is actually, an advertisement for dish soap, but it's a great example of how to tell a story about the importance of a small action at a large scale, how small actions can have big consequences. And then in the middle here, you just see great examples of campaigns that really told people how to take action and what that can look like, and giving people lots of examples so that you're being inclusive, so that there's going to be sort of an option for everyone. Not everyone may choose everything, but you're giving people lots of ways to activate. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I'm going to plow ahead and assume that you'll jump in and let me know if you want to go deeper on any of this. Number 4 is about catalyzing commitment. So something that we know about people psychologically is that we have a desire to be consistent. We like to be the kind of person that we say we're going to be, and we like to not have there can be sort of cognitive dissonance around, well, I believe X, but maybe my actions are in contrast to that, and that feels uncomfortable. So the more that you can get people to consciously commit to certain types of behaviors and then reinforce that, we have psychological mechanisms that align with reinforcing that over time. So it becomes a positive, like a virtuous cycle, as opposed to the opposite of that. So one way to do that is just to give people an opportunity, whether it's on social media or in person or through various types of campaigns, to publicly say, I will do X. And that has an impact on how people then behave. They're going to take a moment next time and think about something in a way that they might not have otherwise, even if they had the same level of intention. Having made that commitment can make a difference. And the more public, the better. We all think about our reputation on these things. We want people to see us as good people. And so there's always that degree of, to the extent that behaviors are public and commitments are public, you get better alignment of the intention and behavior. The 5th one in this category of kind of ways to align your messaging with what we know about behavioral science, and I hope, there we go, is to tap positive emotions and to be sure to avoid fear and guilt. So fear and guilt, fear in particular is actually a very powerful motivator. People do very quickly adapt their behavior based on fear. The challenge is raising the sort of specter of fear and then not actually giving people something tangible they can do about it is really hard. It tends to just turn into anxiety or a desire to sort of just not think about it. People just put it out of their minds because it makes them feel powerless. And so you want to be really careful about scaring people about how much microplastic they are ingesting every day when it's really hard to actually do something about that in a sort of individual life moment. That's not something could I go out and replace every single synthetic item in my home? Maybe, but that's not accessible to most people, including me. And it's just very demoralizing for folks. Guilt, similarly, guilt works really well for a small portion of the population. There are a percentage of people who are super motivated by guilt-based messaging, but the vast majority of people do not find sort of guilt-inducing messages compelling, and they actually can create kind of a backlash where people we can fight back. We resist the guilt message in a way that actually may make them feel stronger in not adopting certain behaviors because they're sort of objecting to or resisting that messaging. So what can you do in terms of emotional appeal? Focusing on positive emotions, which maybe sounds corny, has been shown in research to be more enduring. So people will adopt a behavior and actually hold on to it longer when you use messages that elicit pride, love, optimism, and hope. So we're really finding that to be a really positive way of tackling this. The other thing to think about is humor. So humor is a wonderful way to get maybe a slightly uncomfortable message across in a way that people can hear it. Humor has long been used for social critique. And so there's a lot of really fun ways to use humor to get a message across on what you want people to do, but in a way that doesn't feel preachy or, sort of superior or naggy. Some of the examples here you can see are, around pride, around optimism, around a little bit of humor. And actually on the next slide, I have just a few examples. These are all examples of beach signs, which I just have enjoyed. And some of them tap into humor and some tap into other things. So some of you, I imagine, are in beachfront communities. I'm sure not all of you. But for example, this one on the upper left hand, on the beach and in the sea, animals do not leave trash, humans do. Please behave like animals. I mean, these are just a little bit funny, a little bit on the nose, but it does make people think, oh yeah, okay, that's fair. I like the Granville Harbor Community Coast Care. Why are you littering? I am a jerk. I do not care about natural areas. Mommy still cleans up after me, or all of the above. So these are just kind of fun ways to get the message across in a way that maybe people can hear a little bit better than straightforward please or other types of messaging that just might not feel as comfortable for folks. So those are my 5 tips on messaging. I'd be really happy to answer questions about these, and then we're going to talk about the next topic in just a moment. So any questions about messaging or anything like that before I shift to the next topic?
And just a reminder, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat box because we've got everyone on mute right now.
Okay, well, I guess that was all perfectly clear. I do hope it was helpful, and I'm happy to share these materials also if that would be a resource to folks. So we're going to shift gears then, and we're going to go into a topic that I think is sort of a really key aspect of plastic waste solutions, and that is reuse. So obviously, it's going to take everything, right? It's going to take recycling. It's going to take sort of eliminating things, but in places where there's a functionality provided by plastic that cannot be easily switched to something else or eliminated, reuse is a really great option. And my team and I have put together a database of reuse solutions that we want to we've made available to help give people a sense of what's possible and what's happening, and also make it really easy for you to connect with and identify types of solutions that might be relevant to the type of work that what you're looking for. So this is a website, reuselandscape.org. I think Christina already put it in the chat a little while ago. And as you can see, and we'll actually give you a tour of this website in just a moment, but I just wanted to give you a sense that this is all about reuse. And the way we think about it is this is not like every possible reusable water bottle that you could buy. This is about reuse as a solution or a system. So everything in this database is about facilitating the reuse of reusable items. That means it could be, a reusable cup or container program where instead of getting takeout in plastic containers, you get them in reusable containers that you return. Either you wash them yourself or someone else washes them, but there's a system that actually facilitates the reuse of those. We've also included in the database behavioral solutions like apps that do help you find a water fountain or give you rewards for bringing your own bag, things like that, because those are still facilitating reuse at the system level. But this is not a catalog of places to buy reusable bags, right? This is all about where to find solutions at the system level. So we can skip to the well, I guess what you can see here is there's the website, and then there's actually the database, which is a Google Sheets database, and you can go in there and sort it and filter it and find whatever you want that's going to be most relevant to you. So Christina, I think the next slide just gives us an overview of, in the charts page, we've already done a bunch of analysis of the landscape. So you can go in and look at our overview charts, and I'll show you in just a second what those look like. But this is in the sort of under the living landscape header. You can see there's a lot of different views of the data. So there's a set of overview charts, there's a set of different types of solutions, and then the subcategories that those represent. And you can see the categories here. It's apps and digital rewards, concentrate-based refills, package-free shops, pre-filled refill systems, refill vending and dispensing, refill via pouches or compostables, reusable cups and containers, shipping and logistics, and then reuse advocacy. So campaigns, education, technical assistance, all of that. And then we do go into a little bit of detail on reusable program characteristics. So who owns the item, who washes it, what kind of a business model is it, things like that. So Christina, if you want to, you can probably drop the slides and then bring up the actual website. We'll just show people around a little bit and give you a little bit of an overview. And yeah, perfect. So you can see we have a couple different tabs at the top. So there's a section just that gives you kind of the basics of reuse. Reuse works, gives you a little bit of sense of why to do reuse, what are some of the things we know about it. And then on the resources page, we've compiled tons and tons of reports, articles, papers, kind of everything that might be helpful to learn more about reuse, to identify solutions that are, fit a certain need that folks might have, and also, just give you more information. So this is sort of everything we know of on reuse that might be useful, as well as some explainer videos and things like that. And then, yeah, so thank you for it goes on and on. If you go onto the website, you'll see it goes on quite a little while there. We also have a newsletter that we publish every 2 weeks. And you can see the archived newsletters under the About page. And we've been doing this, let's see, I think we put out, I don't know what number we're on, 20 maybe, something like that. So there's a good archive here which just gives updates on interesting things that are happening, new solutions being launched, new resources, things like that. So feel free to register for that if you're interested in getting that every 2 weeks. It's always short and interesting, at least we think it's interesting. I imagine some of you would too. So I wanted to give you just a sense of some of the charts. So under the living landscape header, we have the charts page. And I just wanted to show a little bit about what we've learned about this space. So for example, this type of solution, and the first one under the overview charts gives you a sense of how the number of solutions shakes out across different types. So you can see package-free shops is the largest segment of solutions right now. I should mention this is a global database, so this is all around the world, not just in the US. Package-free shops is an area candidly, it's hard to catalog all of them, so we've done everything we can. I'm sure this undercounts the number that actually exists in the world, but we're doing the best we can. And I'll mention the reason it's called the living landscape of reuse solutions is because we update it weekly, if not daily. So every time we see something new, we put it in. All of these charts on the website load directly from the Google Sheet, so they're always current with what's in the database. So it's always a current resource. Underneath package-free shops, we've got reuse advocacy, so a lot of campaigns, a lot of education programs, a lot of policy advisory type stuff, a lot of great advocacy work going on. Reusable cup and container programs is another category where we see a lot of solutions, and that's also where Perpetual is focusing, so I'll talk a bit more about that space in a little bit. And then you can see there's smaller numbers of some of these other categories, and not as many apps and digital rewards as some of the other categories, but there's still a significant number of solutions. We have 21 globally, which is pretty exciting. You'll notice in terms of for-profit versus nonprofit, most of these solutions are for-profit, with most of the advocacy being nonprofit. But there's a handful of nonprofit solutions in some of the different categories as well. This is an area where people are really trying to do good and do well, and so there is nice alignment, I think, in the nonprofit space for some of these types of solutions as well. What you'll notice under a solution type by growth stage is that this is still a very young industry. So the vast majority of organizations working in this space are at the pilot or startup phase. There are some that are in the growth stage and some that are established, but really for the most part, these are brand new solutions that people are working on, figuring out, and working to scale. So that's a big part of kind of where this industry is right now. And that's further reinforced by the chart just below here, solution by launch year. You can see we've had huge growth in solutions over the past 5 years. They've tailed off a little bit with COVID, but not as much as you might have thought. In fact, I think we've seen that people's awareness of waste has actually expanded during COVID, and it makes some people much more interested in solutions than they were before. That people's awareness of just how much waste they're generating, especially with like restaurant takeout and stuff like that, or the personal protective equipment like masks. And people are seeing more litter as a result too. So this is definitely an area where we think that there was a COVID bump, or a blip maybe, but we definitely see solutions very much on the rise since then, driven perhaps by even greater consumer awareness of some of these problems. We've got, so I'm not going to walk through all of these, but I wanted to give you an orientation. We've got maps, we've got a lot of other detail, but just wanted to make you aware of this as a resource and hope that, you know, as you're thinking about what your community needs and solutions in your community, that this can be really helpful. So curious, I think there was a question in the chat. Let me just pull that up. Let's see. So Katie, you're asking, okay, you said, what do you say when restaurants or food vendors say that paper and biodegradable single-use alternatives are too expensive when compared to single-use plastic? What about resources for buying alternatives? This is a tricky point. Sorry, I've just got children in the background here. So the alternatives are often more expensive, and they're not always better depending on the context in which they're being used. So it's not always worth it, I think, for companies to make the switch to a biodegradable or a compostable unless you have the appropriate facilities to manage that waste. Otherwise, you're just creating a different type of single-use product as opposed to plastic, you know, single-use plastic, which is where, you know, you can see I have a bias towards some of the reuse solutions that, you know, reuse really avoids that disposable behavior, regardless of what the material is that's being disposed of. I think this is another place where policy may be helpful. I think it's going to be a long time before we have biodegradable or paper or compostable alternatives that are at the same price point as single-use plastic. You know, the single-use plastic supply chain has been optimized for a very long time, and it's just at a greater scale and at, you know, much lower price point. So if the desire is to shift to alternative materials and have the corresponding infrastructure to be able to manage those, it's likely that you'll need policy to even the playing field. So you'll need to have a fee on plastic, for example, or some kind of requirement. Otherwise, the economic argument is really tough to make because they're not going to be, I think, comparable on cost for a while. I think there is something to be talked about in terms of, you know, we know that people really care about this issue. We know that people are concerned, people want visible solutions to plastic waste and they want alternatives. So I think some businesses may recognize that it is so important to their customers that the price difference is worth it. And others, I think it'll just be very hard to make a compelling argument that it's worth spending more. Oh, thank you for the shout out to Upstream. So Upstream Solutions is a great organization that's also very focused on reuse, and something that we also work with quite a bit. So I appreciate the link there. I hope I've answered your question sufficiently, Katie, and happy to hear if anyone wants to push back on that, and we can dig in on that further. But I think everything we've seen around switching to alternatives is that you're just swapping one thing for another. And then there's very few places where there's good end-use solutions for biodegradables or for compostables. And there's a behavioral risk where if people see that something is marked as biodegradable, it actually can make them think it's okay to litter it because it'll just go away. And of course, that's not the case. So any other questions on this resource? on because we're going to talk a bit more about reuse, but you know, in the context of Perpetual. Okay, Jim, thank you for your question. I see. How do you interact with elected officials who've bought into a politicized party line position on single-use plastics, courtesy of the American Chemistry Council? Great question, and one that comes up actually also in the reuse context. I'm sure you've seen there's a lot of studies that show how disposables are better for the environment than reusables. And this is one of the things that's really tricky, actually, is, first of all, there are very few truly objective LCAs out there. And the ones that we've looked at, and like LCAs, I'm sure everyone's familiar, but life cycle analysis studies. So studies that look at the full life cycle costs and impact of disposables versus reusables. They're very helpful tools to provide sort of a scientific view and make sure that you're taking a full life cycle view, but they're also very sensitive to the assumptions that you make as part of doing those analyses. And so they can be manipulated to sort of show one certain set of outcomes versus another. So it's something you have to be there's sort of definitely a buyer beware view of reading those, because what we've observed is that in the reuse space, for example, you have a whole bunch of reuse LCAs done by disposables manufacturers, or like the American Chemistry Council, that decide or determine that disposables are better. On the other side, you have publications in reuse LCAs, and actually Upstream, the one that is linked here, has one that they put out not too long ago that shows that reuse is better. And a lot of that is just the devil's in the details. We see that there's absolutely the potential for reuse systems to be better, but they need to be very intentionally designed to be better. It's easy to have a reuse system that is worse than a disposable system. It has to do with the weight of the container, the material that the container is made from, how many times it's getting reused. So if you have a bunch of reusable containers that are being used just a handful of times, that's not going to be better. And that's part of the argument with some of these reusable shopping bags, for example, is that you have to use them quite a few times in order to offset the additional material impact that you have from having a more durable bag compared to the super thin film, plastic grocery bag. So I think to sort of loop back here to the question from Jim, how do you raise that with elected officials? I think there's a couple things. I think one is being able to unpack for them some of the, like they might have seen headlines from LCAs saying X or Y, and being able to kind of unpack that a little bit and say, well, they came to that conclusion because they assumed X, but maybe that's not the right assumption in our community, or maybe there's ways that we need to sort of just be a little bit more critically thinking about that, because maybe that's not in fact how our system works. So I think that's one way to do it, is get into the details just enough to highlight that those conclusions may not be what they seem at face value. I also think that elected officials want solutions, and I think often there's a fear, I think there's a sense that the business community has a lot of concerns about the viability of different alternatives, whether that's the biodegradables, the compostables, which might be more expensive, or reuse solutions, which seem hard, maybe expensive, all of that. And so I think a key piece here is really bringing the business voice into the conversation with elected officials, and demonstrating that there are solutions that are really good for business, that actually are things that business would be excited to get behind, and that if you bring the business voice to elected officials and find a way to find that common ground, I think you can overcome some of the ACC messaging. That may be easier said than done in certain contexts. I know, some businesses are not going to be open-minded on some of these things, but if you can find the folks that are and start to build that coalition, I think we've seen that can work pretty well. So Jim, feel free to put follow-up questions if I haven't sufficiently shared my thoughts on this question. I know it's not an easy question. It's a really tricky thing, and definitely something that I'm sure a lot of folks are wrestling with. Thanks, Christina, for putting the policy page up here. So this is another element of the living landscape, and that's in the US. We have a map of policy that's been enacted. So this does not include things that are in the proposal stage, only things that have been enacted. But what you can see, and I can't, Christina, can you pull the whole chart up? There we go. Is that more and more folks are able to pass legislation and policy around this. I know that the preemptive bans is a challenge in many geographies where bans have been banned by, industry through proactive lobbying at that level. But we're starting to see more and more serviceware restrictions. So you can see that sort of teal color. The last 5 years, there have been 9 to 12 enacted each year. And that's things like no styrofoam, or it can be a fee for a single-use cup or things like that. So it can be ways that start to level the playing field between reuse and alternative materials and single-use plastic. So there is an economic story, of course, that is front and center to many of the participants in these systems. Any other questions sort of on the landscape as a whole? Otherwise, I'll switch to the Perpetual part of the presentation. Okay, well, this is all one conversation, so if you have other thoughts, feel free to throw them in the chat. And let's see. All right, Christina, thank you. So I wanted to start a little bit with an introduction on sort of where Perpetual came from. So as we were working on the reusable landscape, which we were just sharing with you, we started digging in on the reusable foodware space specifically. And we think about reusable foodware as existing either within a closed loop or within an open loop. Closed loop, perhaps self-evidently, is a place where people are not leaving the premises with items. So it's a university campus, it's a stadium, it's a music festival, it's a corporate cafeteria, it's a school. So these are things that are circulating within a single environment. And there's some really great examples of solutions that have been implemented in a closed loop environment. The other piece of reusable foodware exists in an open loop. And this is where maybe you go to your coffee shop and you get your coffee in a reusable mug, but then you go to work and then you need to do something with that mug. Or maybe you're getting takeout and you're taking it home, or you're getting takeout at the office. And then what do you do with all those containers when you're done? So an open loop system is a way that it facilitates items circulating within a neighborhood or a city, and that means having the infrastructure to support that. So having collection bins, having washing infrastructure, having the ability to rebalance items over, throughout the day as things get used and then washed and then, brought back so they can be used again. There's also great examples of this happening today, especially in the US and Europe. We have 75 programs. It's actually more than this now. I think since we made this slide, the number has gone up because there's just a lot happening in the reuse space right now. And it's building on technology that's gotten stronger and stronger, as people have really worked on this problem. So if you go to the next slide, Christina, I just had a bunch of examples I wanted to share to make this kind of real and help raise your awareness of some of the different things that are going on out there, and then we'll talk about how Perpetual fits in. So you can see here a bunch of different examples of the types of programs that are happening today. GoBox, some of you may have heard of. Recup and Rebowl. Deliver Zero is based in New York City, and it focuses on takeout. Recircle has been operating in Switzerland for a while, and you can see on the right-hand side, there's programs, across, the U.S. and across Europe, operating, in some places you have multiple, and other places you just have one or two. So if you go to the next slide, Christina, I have a couple of examples just to I always think pictures are helpful, because one of the things we know about reuse systems is that it can be really hard to imagine what it would really feel like to be in a system where this was the norm, where this is how things are working. So this is one example. It's a closed loop example. City of Seattle has an initiative called Reuse Seattle, and they're working with music venues with a reuse program operator called RCUP. And they're actually also working with an organization that is helping develop standards called PR3. And the standards are to help ensure that as reuse grows over time, that there is interoperability and that the system can be optimized over time. So that's an important part of this as well. So in Seattle, at music venues and festivals, you can borrow an RCUP and then use it, and then you return it. It's pretty straightforward. The cups are all RFID enabled, and so you can't track them in any sort of geographic way or sort of geospatial way, but what they do is as they're bagging up trash, they'll have like a wand that can tell, so if you wave the wand across the garbage bag, you'll know if there's a cup in there or not, because even though these cups are more durable than what you might think of as a single-use cup, because we have that behavior, so ingrained in us of like throwing plastic away, people don't always register that it's a reusable item. Sometimes they just chuck it in the garbage because it feels like garbage. So this is one example. Another example, and this is an open loop example, is Tim Hortons in Vancouver. And I believe this is actually expanding over time to include other fast food chains as well. Tim Hortons is sort of like Dunkin' Donuts, for those of you who've never been to Canada or are not big hockey fans. I think Tim Hortons has a presence in a lot of stadiums that have hockey in the US, which I think is interesting, given the Canadian connection. These are pictures I took on a trip to Vancouver, and you can borrow a cup for $4. It's a refundable deposit. You just scan the code, pay your $4 deposit, and when you're done, you return it. Alternatively, you pay a 25-cent fee for disposable cups. So that's another way that they've sort of made the economics favorable to reuse, as opposed to making the disposable one sort of the cheaper and easier option. And Katie, I'm just noticing your comment in the chat. So state versus regional. I think that the state level would make a lot of sense. Something that can be tricky at the regional or even at the city level is if you have, so in Berkeley, for example, the city of Berkeley implemented a 25-cent fee on disposable cups, and Berkeley shares very porous boundaries with the communities around it. So there was a lot of concern by the businesses that maybe are across the street from a jurisdiction that does not have a fee, but they were going to just lose a ton of business because people are just going to go across the street and get their coffee somewhere else. And so I think you want to be thoughtful about that when you're thinking about policies and leveling the playing field, is you don't want to put some businesses at a disadvantage. The whole point is to level the playing field, not to penalize some and reward others, or vice versa. So I like the idea of states that share a watershed. That I think the devil will be in the details on that. Is that practical? But I do think that the more you can sort of have a geographic area where you're not going to have that conflict of like people just crossing the boundary as a way of escaping a tax or changing the model, that's something to be aware of. I think right now, because of things like the ACC's lobbying and other things, it's tricky to work at the state level. And I think we're going to be forced to probably build on regional or city-based examples for a while. But my hope is that as those city examples show success, that these can be adopted, at the state level. And I think that would be the ideal. I just think it's probably not realistic just yet, unfortunately. And another thing to mention, again, is that policymakers need to see solutions, right? They don't want to create a policy that's just going to make everything hard. They want to create policies that are setting up a new way of operating that's actually going to be successful. And so that's the key thing to think about here, is not just, you don't want to ban something without having an alternative, without having something that people can use instead. Jean, I see your comment, should be concerned with plastic because of chemicals. Yes, I think that's a really, really important question. And it's something that we wrestle with because we believe it's, of course you want it to be safe. Like that's just foundational, right? You don't want to be putting people in danger through a reusable option that's going to release chemicals over time, release microplastics over time. That's bad. Nobody wants that. The tension is that plastic, from an LCA perspective, because it's very lightweight and very durable, shows you don't have to use plastic as many times to make it a better alternative to disposable. So it puts the pressure on the system to ensure that you're not losing items. So if you use a stainless steel cup, and there are programs that have very intentionally chosen that, stainless steel is a great option. And you have the ability to do like a double wall stainless steel cup or container, which has nice thermal properties. You get insulation, you reduce condensation and that. So a lot of functional benefits that people can be really excited about. Some stainless steels, like I know you have to sort of be thoughtful about design. Some people perceive a taste with certain types, but there's others that don't have that. So there's definitely good stainless steel options. The reality though is just that stainless steel is going to be heavier and it has a higher environmental impact to create those cups. So you just want to be really thoughtful. If you're using stainless steel, you need to get everything back. Like you can't have people using them twice and then losing them or keeping them or throwing them away, because then you have actually created a bigger problem than you've solved. So that's something to keep in mind. Let me just go through a couple more examples here, and then talk a bit more about how Perpetual, because these are all questions actually that Perpetual is really wrestling with in helping to think about reusable foodware systems at city scale. So I wanted to share a couple of other corporate examples here. Burger King has been experimenting with reusables, and you can see just this example here. They're doing it in the UK, they're doing it in the US, they've done it around the world. The thing I think is really great to identify here is that consumers actually really like reusables. They find it to be a better experience. They appreciate the design and the feel of the items. Now, of course, these are plastic. But to the point we just talked about, I think you can have an even more elevated experience with better materials that are less at risk of having toxic leaching and microplastics and things like that. But even the plastic items are getting good reviews from users. So this is just another example of this is happening, right? Like people are putting containers out in the world, they're getting them back. We're learning a lot from these processes about what works and what doesn't work. Starbucks is the last example here. They've done some pilots in Singapore. They've also been doing some pilots in Europe, where they're planning on actually having very large rollout of reusable solutions across all 4,000 of their stores in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. These are still all plastic. So it's interesting to note that at the corporate level, at the chain level, there's a cost consideration, there's the LCA consideration, but definitely not something that we take for granted. I don't think we assume that plastic is going to be the right answer, but there is that sort of system level design consideration to figure out. So having gone through some of those examples, Perpetual is a new nonprofit that is partnering at the city level to design and support the implementation of reuse systems, starting with foodware. And this initiative has emerged from all of this other work that we've done. So we have a wonderful team of people who are experienced in reuse and are very sort of steeped in all of these issues and have been for a long time. And the question we kept asking ourselves, especially looking at the reuse landscape, is all these things are sort of getting piloted, but there's a lot of there's a lack of real scale, right? We're not getting to a point where you're getting that to the point around normalization. Like we're not getting the behavior change switch where we go from having disposable be the norm to having reusable be the norm. We're still having reuse be a little bit harder, a little bit requires a bit more effort from the users and from the businesses. And it's going to be very hard to make the switch unless we can give people the experience of reuse at immersive scale, so they can really see what it feels like to exist in a reuse ecosystem. And that will also give us better data on, to feed more objective LCAs. It'll give us a better sense of the economics of this over time. Can we get to a scale where reuse is truly, if not on parity with disposables, at least competitive with them? If you have a certain number of washes and a volume in a system, can that actually get pretty close over time to what businesses are paying for disposables, especially if they're using compostable or, biodegradable disposables that are more expensive? And how can we see, what those environmental impacts really do look like when the system is operating at a meaningful scale? So we created Perpetual, and I can tell you a little bit about what Perpetual is doing. There's really two main things that Perpetual is focused on right now. One is we are partnering with 3 cities. We're in the process of selecting those cities. So if some of this looks like you, we'd love to talk further with you. And Christine, you can go to the next slide. And we're also just advising cities on reuse in general, because it's something we've observed that a lot of cities are thinking about what to do about this, and it can be really hard to just figure out the path forward. We've talked with cities that say, oh, well, we've got reuse providers pitching us on this, and we've got businesses saying they want to do it, and we've got consumers who care, but we don't quite know how to fit the pieces together. And I think that's exactly where we are as a society on this topic, is going from this seems interesting, this seems like it could work, to this is how it works, and these are models that we know work. So Perpetual really imagines a world where reuse systems are better than disposable. As I talked about earlier when I talked about behavior, sustainability is not going to be the message that resonates for everyone, but everybody wants a better experience. And so if you can provide people with something that is actually functionally better, you don't have to tout the sustainability. Sustainability doesn't have to be the reason for doing it. That can just sort of be a bonus. And it can be something that people say about why they like it, but the reason that they will actually use it is because they like it better than disposables. Reuse can be a climate solution. It can absolutely be environmentally superior to disposable, but it won't be without careful design. We've already talked about human exposure to toxic chemicals, huge concern there with disposable plastics and even with some reusable plastics. We do think that, the reuse systems can be economically self-sustaining over time, that they need to be affordable for businesses and cost neutral to users, especially when thinking about accessibility and equity, so that it can really be for everyone and can serve all populations. And it's important also that, we think about the good local job aspect of things. And I see, Kelly, if you're still on, you use models that are owned collaboratively like a co-op. That's a wonderful question. So that's exactly what we're looking at. How do you design a system and sort of a governance model for a system that is designed for the community and that really meets the community's needs? And I think a co-op has great potential to be that kind of a governance structure for reuse systems. So happy to talk more about that if you're interested, but I know you said you have to jump off. So going to the next slide, and again, feel free to keep the questions coming. We see these different reasons for adopting reusable foodware. I think I've probably also more than made the point that we think it can be a better experience. We know that people care about visible solutions to plastic pollution. We think it can be safer. We know that disposable foodware can be dangerous. It can be cleaner. It will lead to cleaner communities because it actually reduces, disposable items, which are highly littered, as I'm sure everyone on this call is very, very aware. People really want it, especially tourists, and tourists from Europe or other places say they want sustainable choices. They want to feel good about the choices they're making as they travel. For cities that have zero waste goals or climate goals or similar things, how can there's a lot of opportunities for reuse to help meet those goals. And then finally, I hope I've shown that reuse systems are doable. Like this may not have been true 5 years ago, but there's been so much work done in this space that like the technology is there. We know what the washing infrastructure can look like. We know there's been a lot of testing on consumer behavior and on reusable items and tracking technology. So it's really more possible now than it's ever been in a way that I think is exciting. Skipping ahead to the next slide. So as I mentioned, Perpetual is looking for city partners. We're looking to do an immersive Foodware implementation in 3 cities over the next year. So what this means for us is we think we need to flip the script. We think we need to work intensively with small cities to create examples of a full reusable ecosystem. We think that will be most manageable at cities with a smaller population, say 50,000 to 120, maybe as high as 150,000 people. The importance there is that then you have a number of restaurants and businesses where you can actually go and talk to everybody and understand their concerns and help them be part of a design process to make sure that the system will work for folks. The geographic containment, I think I already talked about, like you can't have boundaries where people are gonna cross nearby boundaries to escape a system or where you might have containers leaking into other areas and it's gonna be hard to create a catchment area that really covers everything. We really think reuse needs to be for everyone, so we're looking for places that are really diverse so that you can show that reuse is for everyone and works for everyone. And in particular places that have a high level of awareness of plastic pollution, because then you really get that community motivation where it's not a political issue, it's a community issue. And I think that's an important piece of this, is we just can't let plastic waste be about politics. And at the community level, I think there's greater awareness that it isn't. It's not black and white, of course. But I think when you have a community that's really aware of the plastic pollution problems and it's very visible in the community, that it's easier to get on board with solutions without making it about, things that can be distracting from the solution. And of course, enabling policies and institutional partners help set the stage for successful reuse. So what Perpetual actually does, and I'm going to skip to the next slide here. I know it's, I'm just talking and talking here, so please do jump in if you're interested in hearing more about anything in particular. But when we think about system design, we think about these 5 kind of requirements. The system has to be optimized in each of these 5 ways in order to be better, in order to really be viable. It has to be economically viable. It has to minimize environmental impact. So it actually has to be environmentally better, which we know is possible, but not guaranteed. It has to be safe, both from a container sort of material container perspective, but also hygiene, making sure that things are being safely sanitized and there's no issues with contamination over time or things like that. It has to be aligned with city planning, and it has to be equitable and accessible. And so these are some of the things that we think about when we're working with cities on system design. We also, when we think about system design, we think about a set of different choices. And I know we're getting into some, this is like super detailed, so bear with me. This is more just to give you a flavor. You don't have to internalize all of these details, but I know for some of you, this just might be exactly kind of what you're wrestling with. Just thinking, well, this all sounds great, but how? Like, how do we actually make this work? And so you need to think about governance. What is the role of the city? What are the rules of engagement for different players? You need to think about the technical considerations. So that's things like cup and container design. We've already talked about materials. How do you manage your assets? Is it tracking? What are the different ways of doing that? So basically, I'm not going to walk through all of this, but there's technical design decisions, there's economic design decisions, and then there's behavioral design decisions, all of which are interrelated. And it's really a community design process. So making sure that the system the community is designing fits that community and fits the needs of those businesses and of those people. I see Meg, you've asked the question, if it's cost neutral to users, who is paying the cost? So there's different ways this can work. Cost neutral to users, we think is really important from an accessibility perspective. And what that usually means is that businesses are paying for it, with potentially the city also contributing. So when you think about who benefits from a reuse system, there are a series of costs that get reduced. Businesses have to, not only do they not have to buy disposables, they also don't have to pay waste hauling costs to have disposables taken away. And there can be some other benefits to businesses as well. Things like if people are using an app to check items out, so the business has additional opportunities to be in touch with that consumer, or can, offer coupons, or, things like that. So there can be some additional engagement value to businesses. The goal is at a certain volume, and this is part of what we want to test with Perpetual, is if you have city scale, like if you're really operating at a city scale volume, can you get the per wash cost low enough that it is not a burden for businesses to pay for the washing of these containers? Because the city can also benefit. Some cities, they bear some portion of the waste management costs for things, and also depending on how a city is managing its waste. Cities that have landfills that are threatening to fill up, may find there's an economic argument for them. So there can be an opportunity for the city to direct some amount of cost savings to support a reusable system as well. So the system can really be designed in a number of different ways, but the goal would be to have the revenue really largely coming from the businesses, but ideally in a way that is not too different from what they're already paying to use disposables today. So that's kind of the short answer to your question. So on this slide, Perpetual really just wants to be a resource to cities and to businesses on how to implement reusable foodware. So as I mentioned, we are specifically looking to partner with 3 smaller cities to implement a reusable system at an immersive scale. But also, we have heard a lot of interest from larger cities that just want help thinking through some of this stuff. And that's something that we are also happy to do. So this gives you a sense of the kinds of things that Perpetual works on. We can do, and actually, Christina, why don't you skip to the process slide, because I think that could be even just a more visual way of talking about it. So this is how we think about a process for deploying reusable foodware. The first step is really mapping and engagement. So working with all the local stakeholders, and we tend to partner with local NGOs. So we don't come in and sort of just do this all ourselves. We find the local people who are already working on this and care about this. And our goal is to partner with those folks and elevate and amplify your work as well. And so finding partners that are sort of local NGOs, local businesses who care about this, and then building the coalition from there, so that you really start to understand, you know, what assets does the community already have? Like, what's already happening? What are some of the specific pain points that cities might be having that would be of particular interest in terms of how a solution would help? So there's things like that. Once you have that ecosystem map and you have a coalition of folks, then you can move into the design phase. And that's where we facilitate a series of design workshops to create the governance framework and a system requirements document that can sometimes take the shape of like a request for proposal. And the goal there is to actually find the system operators, the program operators who want to come in and run the system. So Perpetual is really a facilitator. We're not coming in to run the reusable foodware process. We're coming in to help create the framework within which reusable foodware can work. And then we leave the operating to the professionals. Because there are, as we've already talked about, many, many companies that are out there that have already done this and are learning the lessons. But the goal here is to bring them into a city in the context where they are very intentionally coming into a framework where we've thought about interoperability. We've thought about shared infrastructure and contracting for shared resources. And we've thought about how to integrate with city planning. And we've thought about accessibility at the city level. So it's bringing those folks in, but in a way that's, it's still the free market, but it's the free market with a set of constraints to really make sure we're optimizing for the outcomes that we want to get. Once we've designed the system, we go into making it happen. So that's everything from, you know, once you choose your operators, getting some of the assets, you know, procured and figuring out exactly, you know, what that's all going to be, getting into the details, and starting to make those decisions to make things a reality. It's permitting, it's, you know, all that kind of stuff. As we get closer to launch, we have a pre-launch phase where you really start to enroll. You'll have a coalition that should include a very strong representation from business, but this is where you start to go to the broader business community and really get them signed up and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. You start to build consumer awareness that this is coming, and you start to build those campaigns. One thing that we know is really important in the success of these systems is training. So all of the frontline workers who have to handle these items and answer questions about them and know what to do with them and know what to do when things don't quite work as expected, it's really important to have all those folks trained and ready so that when things, you know, but they get questions about it, well, what about this? I see like a watermark on this item. Does that mean it's dirty? No, it's blah, blah, blah. So like being able to answer questions and help people feel excited about the system is really important. So that's something that Perpetual would help with, of course. So pre-launch is getting everything ready. You launch the system, and ideally that all goes super well because it's been very carefully and thoughtfully planned for many, many months. And then over time, you improve the system. And one piece of how we're doing this also is we're building sort of a working group of cities that are working on this so that folks who are living this day to day can talk to each other and learn from each other, sort of like a peer sharing group among not just city people, but sort of anyone working on reuse in different cities can be part of that network to learn from each other as everyone is figuring this out together. So, gosh, that's a lot. I've talked for a very long time. I hope that if you are a city or if you're in a city that you think could be a good partner for Perpetual and this is interesting to you, I'd love for you to reach out. We'd love to talk with you. We do have some cities in the pipeline already, but we're really interested in having the right set of geographic, we want a good set of examples. So people kind of across the country highlighting different types of communities adopting reuse. We think that's really important. Here's just a glimpse of the Perpetual team. So there's myself and Christina, who of course is on the line with me. We also have some other wonderful people that are participating with us. Dagny Tucker is actually a reuse entrepreneur herself, or was. She has sold her business doing reuse because she likes to work at the system design level. So she has a lot of great on the ground, you know, has done this 3 times before implementing in different cities. So she's a great resource on kind of the operational realities and getting everything planned. Some of you may be familiar with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Sarah Wingstrand led innovation there for a long time and has a great sense of the innovation process and how to, you know, be really successful in bringing solutions, not just to pilot scale, but beyond. And then the other person I'll highlight on the team is Lane Marshall, who is actually with the EPA's Trash-Free Water team. Some of you may even know her through that role. So she's partly sort she's on our team, not full time because she has a full job at the EPA as well. But the EPA's Trash Free Waters program is partnering with Perpetual because they're really interested in advancing upstream solutions to plastic pollution. So they've done a lot of work, as I'm sure many of you know, on some of the more downstreams, and they're really excited to, oh, and Lane is on the call. Wonderful. Thanks, Christina. I haven't had a chance to flip through all the names. Lane, glad you're here. And if anyone has questions for Lane, feel free to put them in the chat as well. So we're super excited to have Lane on the team and to be partnering with Trash Free Waters because their program is doing so much good. And we think that the reuse piece can help further offer more value to communities struggling with plastic pollution. And I think we just have the advisors on here. So maybe put that up and then we can drop the slides. But we have a wonderful group of advisors who actually are very connected to many of the other efforts out in the world. So you'll notice Amy Larkin from PR3, who's working on standards. We obviously want to be making sure that those standards are being used and implemented. Matt Prindeville is the CEO of Upstream, which was mentioned earlier. They're a group who does a lot of great work on reuse as well. So we're happy to partner with them. And you see we've got people thinking about behavior. We've got the WEF, Global Plastic Action Partnership, represented with Christian, Kate Daly from Closed Loop Partners, and the Closed Loop team is super supportive of what we're up to. And some of you may know Dr. Jenna Jambeck from her work in this space as well. So we have a wonderful group of advisors, and yeah, we're just really excited to bring greater resources to communities struggling with plastic pollution to make reuse feel more doable as a solution, because I think it can feel hard, but it's not as hard as you think it is. I guess that's what I would say. So that is everything I had to present, and I would be very happy to talk more and to hear from folks. I know that was probably a lot. So yeah, and I hope that my children haven't been too loud in the background.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That is just tons of great information. Reminding everyone we did record this. So if you have to take a look at the slides again, you'll have that opportunity. We'll send that link to you. There was one question about the Perpetual, the 3 cities that you'll be selecting. The question is it cost neutral to the cities you'll be working with, or what kind of financial burden would this participating cities have?
That's a great question. So for the 3 cities that we partner with, we will bring the funding to cover the cost of partnering with us. So the cities don't have to pay to partner with us if you're one of our 3 demonstration cities. If you're a larger city looking for more consulting support, there's different ways to do that. We don't have existing funding to cover that, but there's some great grants out there that are coming through the infrastructure bill and some other EPA grants. So if folks are interested in partnering with us and you don't feel like it would be easy to contract with us as a consulting nonprofit to your city, we can look at shared fundraising efforts and shared grant writing to see if we can support you through grants. But for the 3 cities that we partner with, we want to really have no barriers to making this happen. So we have done fundraising and are continuing to do fundraising to support our partnership with the 3 cities, so that the ask from the cities is more about being a vocal champion and supporting the effort through actions and the way that you talk about things, as opposed to through needing to contract us. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, great. And where are you in the process of selecting these 3 cities? Have you already selected 1 or 2 of them?
We have 4 cities that are sort of moving through our process. So the way that first phase of the process, the sort of ecosystem mapping, we're currently doing that with 4 cities to learn about really what's going to work for each of them and to see where we're at. But I think it's very likely that we are still open to other cities. So nothing is final. There's still definitely room to participate. I think we want to be really thoughtful about the mix of cities that we have. And I will say I think Virginia is a very interesting place to do something like this. So I would be very interested in speaking with Virginia cities on this. And yeah, definitely still opportunity.
Well, great. We agree that Virginia would be a great place. So if you're interested, we'll put Ellie's contact information in the chat box. And at this point, are there any final questions for Ellie before we wrap up? I do want to point out too that Ellie's coworker, Christina Gherkin is one of our keynote speakers at the Virginia Marine Debris Summit on September 27th and 28th. And also Lane from EPA, who's working with Perpetual, will also be speaking at the summit. So just one more plug. We want to see y'all there. So any other questions in the chat box? And Ellie's email has now been added. Thank you to the chat box.
I do have to say that I saw a familiar skip the straw folder, keep it beachy clean. So I'm very proud of that.
I saw that too. Thank you, Ellie, for including.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, of course.
Each
Of
effort.
course.
Yay. Yep.
Thank you for your good work. Yeah.
So I actually do have a quick question. If a large city such as Virginia Beach, who has a population of about 450,000 with a tourist population of about 6 million, wanted to participate in something like this, how would we do? I mean, whether it was through your program or through something else, I mean, would you, I just can't even imagine trying to do it citywide. Would you suggest picking a section, kind of a community within the city? And is that something you all are also looking at, or are you just looking at actual cities?
Yeah, it's a great question. If a city is so large as to make it infeasible to do a fully immersive implementation from day one, then I do think you want to look at your sort of business districts and think about which of those might be a good place to start. And there's different considerations to think about there. Another way to think about it is to start in closed loop spaces and then expand from there. So do you have an area where most of the consumption is happening on premises? The real challenge when you do a partial implementation is just that your loss rates get higher because people are taking items out of the catchment zone of the reusables. Like it won't be as easy for them to drop it in a bin, and then it ends up in their Tupperware cabinet from which things may never return. And so I think the design questions that we look at are, how can you identify part of a downtown area or part of a city where you have pretty good, where people are, their consumption is happening within a pretty discrete radius. So things that like a downtown area that serves a lot of tourists or where people are coming and spending a lot of time in that area can be a good fit. A place where people are, maybe it's a commuter destination, so people are leaving their homes, maybe, you know, getting a coffee at their Starbucks, driving to a business district like an office park. So you can think about hubs, you can think of, so there's, I'm mindful of time, but the short answer is there's different ways to analyze your geography and figure out where would be good places to start, or how do you identify the use patterns within a city. So where are people living, where are people working, where are people socializing, and how can you design something so that you don't have to overinvest in infrastructure, but you have enough to still make it easy, where people still don't have to work too hard to return. That's kind of the essence of it. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Everyone's faces are frozen on my screen, so I couldn't quite tell if I was still being through. But and I think, you know, we're happy to have those conversations with folks. You know, we won't have the resources to do a you know, massive implementation with everyone, but we can absolutely share what we know and be a resource as much as we can, you know, within our available resources. So I hope that makes sense.
Well, thank you very much. And I think we all got a lot out of today's presentation. So thank you. And I think what we can do with the last 4 minutes of our meeting today is quickly go around the horn if anyone's got an activity or an event coming up, and keep all these to like 30 seconds. And I'll go first. The International Coastal Cleanup, statewide volunteer cleanup all throughout the state of Virginia. Cleanups start in August and go through November. And you can reach out to me, and I'll put information. But right now we're organizing these cleanups, and we're hoping to get back to pre-COVID numbers with our volunteers. So anyone else have any quick things they want to share with everybody?
Can they unmute themselves?
Oh, yes, I will go ahead and allow you to unmute yourself. Hold on. Sorry. All right, you're all allowed to speak now.
Anyone have any last minute comments or upcoming events that we should all know about, or something exciting related to plastic pollution prevention?
And you can send it to us to put in the newsletter, which is going out tomorrow, if you have
Yes.
something.
Yeah. Anything plastic pollution prevention related, newsletters going out tomorrow, send that to Virginia PPP, 3 P's and an N at gmail.com today, if you would. Something short, sweet, and already rewritten, ready to go. I think we're good.
All right.
Yeah.
All
Ellie,
right.
thank you so much. And Christina, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for coming. Hopefully we'll see you in September. We do not have a September meeting, but we want to see you here in Virginia Beach.
For the summit, yes.
Yes, September 27th and 28th.
Again, thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Christina, and see you all in November online and September in Virginia Beach.
Bye.